So this is just coming to 15:48 hours GMT, 16:48 hours British Standard Time on Sunday, 12th of June 2022. And this is the KhoodeelaarTV television channel. We're broadcasting online on the internet only, not on satellite, not on the terrestrial or cable networks, only on the internet, but it's accessible nonetheless. This is the fourth edition that is being broadcast after the 6 calendar months break that was caused by factors that were beyond our control from the second half, effectively, of January 2022 until the last Saturday. So we have a lot of catching up to do. The number one issue is to clarify that the title of the theme, or the theme title that used to be called the World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street, has been replaced by the wider remit, which is a statement that we are doing the diagnosis of the wider politics and political situation rather than just confining the analysis to Fleet Street. Say, for example, what we are saying is that the World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street has been replaced by World Exclusive Diagnosis of the world of political states, parliaments, jurisprudence, constitutions in the context of the universal need for justice, the emergency duty to stop violating the planet, and to move to ending poverty at root. Now, anyone who is familiar with the last 3 calendar years of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel broadcast on the internet would have come across literally dozens of references to the broadcast that I presented on Channel 4 television in January 1990. That was the week during which the then British Prime Minister, John Major, was about to go to the United Nations General Assembly because it was the United Kingdom's turn to chair that session of the United Nations General Assembly. And what I focused on in that broadcast, which is called Slot on the Channel 4 News, which was a 3-minute long, brief, precise broadcast that was a very effective broadcast that was slotted, literally slotted as the slot, immediately following the 7 o'clock news, the local time, which is the local 7 p.m. British Standard Time main edition of the Channel 4 News. So I wrote that particular edition of this slot and I focused on the two things. One was the General Assembly theme that John Major had been flagging, saying that nuclear proliferation had to be opposed and stopped. And his main actual attention was not about nuclear weapons being possessed by the likes of the United States or the Soviet Union, which had just been dismembered and replaced by Russia, or France, or the United Kingdom itself, or any other countries that had the tag attached to them as the Western countries. These, coincidentally, China as well, of course, the only one that is not categorizable as a Western country, but these are coincidentally the members of the Security Council of the United Nations. which means in practice that they can veto any of the Security Council members of the United Nations can veto any motion, any decision, any resolution of the United Nations. That is called the veto power. So that is coincidentally exercisable by the countries which also have the nuclear weapons, the biggest arsenals on nuclear weapons. So John Major wasn't actually opposing either the veto of the Security Council or the possession of the nuclear weapons by the Security Council members. What he was opposing was new nation states or countries acquiring nuclear weapons. So I said that that was completely, in effect, I'm not reading a script of that broadcast, but it can be retrieved. I said that that was completely impractical and was of no practical consequence in the context of the biggest demographic challenge being faced by the mainly, quote, Western countries. I wrote the script from Stepney, from my home in Stepney, London E1. And what I said there was that instead of focusing on the nuclear weapons ambitions by new countries, John Major and the Western countries should be focusing on ending poverty and hunger in the third world, so-called, or the countries, African and Asian countries, which numerically produce the highest numbers of people leaving their homelands in search of locations, refuges, and so on in the West. Now, in January 1990, there was no such phrase as asylum seeker in the way that there is now or since. The phrase asylum seeker is a kind of device that has been created by a combination of elements and advisors and expertise, which is to disguise the real purpose, essentially to allow the people seeking asylum to benefit from the various international treaties and provisions about helping people who are seeking asylum from persecution in their home countries and the countries of origin. Home countries are not necessarily always countries of origin, but that is what the device actually enables the people who can call themselves asylum seekers. So since January 1990, this is 32 years plus 5 months since I did that broadcast in January 1992. Was it 1992? I think it was January 1990. So it's 30 years, not 32 years. But what I did in that was not to give a list of the various devices that were used at that time by the people seeking effectively what is now known as asylum, but refuge, a place they could build their homes in after leaving their countries. Now, this is not the edition that I want to examine the various procedural and legal and legalistic obstructions that have been created against people who are legitimately entitled to seek asylum. This is the edition where I'm saying that the Western countries, including Britain, France, Germany, the USA, Canada, of course, and Western countries, because of the imperialistic kind of connections, include New Zealand and Australia, although they are not geographically located in the West. Culturally, they're Western. ideologically they're Western, and in terms of their attitude towards the people of African and Asian origin, they're Western, because the inherent narrative that dominates the attitude of the people affected by the propaganda against the poorest people, people persecution, afflicted people seeking escape from persecution and hunger and poverty, is very much based on racism and racist presumption of superiority on the part of the Western countries. Now, although I was not addressing racism and imperialism, I was in effect addressing the real phenomenon, and I was saying that if the Western countries failed to address the poverty, the hunger, the famine, the violations, and the violence that these people from African countries and Asian countries and the countries of the origin would seek to escape and flee, then a time would come soon when these Western countries would be complaining of being overwhelmed by people seeking asylum, seeking refuge. Well, they didn't say asylum at that time, but the seeking refuge, what is effectively become asylum. And the reported statement by Prince Charles, I'm putting that within quotation marks, Prince Charles, that sending people from the UK to Rwanda in Africa was appalling. This has been now followed by the retort to him by the likes of the Sunday Express, telling him off, saying that he shouldn't meddle in politics. Now, again, this is not the edition to discuss at length the Constitution of the United Kingdom and to show that this Sunday Express opinion telling of Prince Charles for meddling in politics is completely facile and untruthful, because the British monarchy, represented by Brenda, also known as Queen Elizabeth II, has been an integral part of the meddling in politics, because she has been facilitating the ruling agenda, and she has not been supporting any of the campaigns, any of the movements that are for freedom, international kind of treaty compliance. For example, the existence since the late 1940s, since the actual establishment of the United Nations, of various hundreds of treaties across the world that are ratified by member countries, United Nations member countries. Most of those treaties actually solve a lot of the problems, including problems caused by the so-called flood or surge or hordes of refugees coming from Africa and Asia to Western destinations. But none of these countries in the West, including the United Kingdom, including the USA, the Canada, Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, none of these countries has actually dealt with honestly the benefits that would arise in terms of addressing the need for so many millions of people to find refuges and asylum in the West. There was an exceptional short period in Germany during Angela Merkel's time as the chancellor, when she relaxed the restrictions that had been imposed on mainly people coming from Turkish backgrounds in Turkey. And for that, Angela Merkel became a symbol of hatred and propaganda, hostile propaganda from the British racist Fleet Street newspapers leading the way. And of course, the German racist newspapers and media, and the Western European smaller countries like Sweden, Austria, and the other little countries across the West, where the right wing and the racist and the pro imperialist elements were agog. They were very loud in condemning Angela Merkel. But she solved the problem by relaxing the restrictions that had been in place against the mainly Turkish people. She had solved the problem. She actually rehabilitated, in my view, the image of Germany that had been contaminated correctly by association with the Nazis and Adolf Hitler and the Nazi kind of legacies. Without that move by Angela Merkel, which came across as a left-wing move, but it wasn't anything to do with that. She was being effectively very pragmatic, and she solved the problem of the reputation that correctly attached to the German country, linked with Nazism, racism, intolerance, and so on. She solved it by that one move alone. So my argument in January 1992 that I addressed to British Prime Minister John Major at the time encompassed this kind of thing. That was long before Angela Merkel came into power, or long before Angela Merkel had been heard of in a political or significant way at all, because that was 1992, not long after the reunification of Germany, after the breakup of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, of which the eastern part of Germany was a part. So I actually foresaw and predicted and prophesied what Angela Merkel did, but that was only one tiny fraction of my prophecy and my prediction and my observation. And I have been vindicated in the case of the Angela Merkel decision in a big way, because that solved the problem of Germany's reputation and image. And since Angela Merkel did that, Germany has not been condemned in anything like the way that her predecessors, between the period of 1945 and up to her coming into power, had been subjected to. So extrapolate that in June 2022, and what I said in January 1992 about addressing, I don't want to call solve, because solving or solution has a nasty reminder attached to the German final solution and so on. So what needs to be done about the huge numbers of people from African countries, from Asian countries, and significant parts of the Latin American kind of origin countries to seek refuge in Western countries because of the comparative economic kind of atmosphere that is, as compared to those countries of the origin, are far better. They're not ideal, but they're far better as compared to those countries of origin. Now, I did that 30 years ago in January, 30 years, 5 months ago, and that has not been heeded by anyone except by Angela Merkel. Now, to what extent she ever heard of my broadcast is another matter. But what she did was the kind of thing that I was anticipating, I was recommending, and I was analytically forecasting and recommending. Now, in the case of the United Kingdom, where I am broadcasting this from, the behavior of the current United Kingdom regime that belongs to the same party as John Major in January 1992. The behavior of the regime fronted by Boris Johnson is very much different from what I could expect John Major to do. I didn't expect John Major to implement this, but I at least anticipated that John Major would appreciate that, because based on various of his comments and statements, I would believe that John Major was amenable to rational, reasonable arguments that I was recommending, I was putting before him. Now, the various steps that Boris Johnson has been taking or has been pretending to be taking about meeting the needs of the electors that he craves the support of, all of those steps are motivated by artificial intention, not motivated by any intention to address the genuine humanitarian, economic, social needs of the people affected. He wants to mislead the people that will cast the vote at whenever the next election is, where he plans to stand as a candidate and lead the Conservative Party. So Boris Johnson is motivated by artificial intentions. He's not motivated by genuine humanitarian, international, ethical, fair purposes or purpose for justice, delivering justice and equality and fairness to people. Boris Johnson, on his record, has got no respect for the international treaties, humanitarian treaties, and other treaties that have liberated the various regimes, legal and constitutional regimes, both in the United Kingdom and in other parts of the Western countries and in other countries that are not in the West but are members of the United Nations and have ratified various of the treaties. Not necessarily every single treaty, but various of the treaties have been ratified by many countries. Without those treaties, none of these countries, and I say not a single one of the countries, would have done anything to take any step to liberate their regimes from the stranglehold of corruption, intense bureaucracy, and intense suppression and persecution of the people, dissident and democratic movements in their own countries. The current package of legislation that is on the table in the United Kingdom following the inauguration of the current legislative season represented for the first time by Brian. Brian is the name of Brenda's eldest son, Charles. And Brenda and Brian are the names that have been used by the private eye editors, not Ian Hislop, but the private eye publishers and writers that actually founded the paper and founded the week satirical paper. So Brenda and Brian are very appropriate popularizations of the names of the monarch and her elder son. So Charles actually presented what is called Queen's Speech, because Brenda, his mother, Elizabeth II, was indisposed or was unable to deliver that speech. And it was also an indirect way to launch Charles or Brian as the next monarch. That is the process that they have actually used this for. So that is the statement called Queen's Speech. And what it means is that it contains kind of short list of items that will be put on the table by the existing executive, that is the government, as a list of legislation that they will pass. And all the legislative moves contained in the Queen's speech are repressive, reactionary, anti-democratic, pro-fascistic, and corrupting. So the High Court decision during the last week in the UK to reject opposition to the Rwanda plot fronted by Priti Patel, who is the Interior Minister in the United Kingdom, was condemned in a personal capacity by Brian Charles himself. And that is what the Sunday Express is condemning. Let's see if we can find the Sunday Express and see if we can read some of the contents of that condemnatory front page. And we shall come to other front pages of today's Sunday, which is the 12th of June 2022. Let's see if we can find the Express, whether it's Sunday Express or the Express. It's not that there are two Sunday Expresses. One is Fleet Street Sunday Express and one is in an African country, I think. Okay, so that one is the Sunday Express that says, "Stay out of politics, Charles." There's a very loud heading condemning Charles by the Sunday Express. Now, the Sunday Express is the continuation of the Express newspapers that became notoriously racist and imperialistic and corrupting when they were controlled by, or the Sunday Express title, in fact, was controlled by the Canadian called Beaverbrook. And this tradition is continued by the Express title, no matter how small the circulation. And it says, "Stay out of politics, Charles." And then it says, "Plus smugglers boast on TikTok how easy it is to get across channel between England and France, as UK spends £1 billion housing them." Now, these are staggeringly misrepresenting the facts and the evidence. So let's read this item titled "Exclusive" by byline to John Coates, John as Jonathan Coates. Prince Charles was last night warned not to meddle in politics after reportedly having branded the government's policy to send migrants to Rwanda as appalling. Members of parliament and royal experts rounded on the heir to the throne and urged him to remain politically neutral. Conservative MP Tom Hunt stressed the Prince of Wales should be incredibly careful going forward. One royal expert warned that the princess, let's go on page 4, that is where it is going. All right, this is the longer headline inside, which says, "Meddling Charles is warned that he risks turning more people against monarchy." Now, that is yet to be seen. But let's see a bit more of that particular vitriolic attack on Charles. It is racist piece through and through. Habitual meddling could even threaten the future of the monarchy. In response to the claims, a Clarence House spokesman said, Clarence House is the name of the address where Charles is based as a member of the royal family, of the heir to the throne coming forward. We would not comment on supposed anonymous private conversations with the Prince of Wales, except to restate that he, that is Brian, remains politically neutral. Matters of policy are decisions for the government. It came as it emerged. The government spent £922 million on hotels for asylum seekers last year. An Albanian man also claimed on TikTok that he can get migrants from France to London in 3 hours, 7 days a week, by illegally crossing the channel in boats. A source claimed to have heard Charles, 73, voicing his opposition to the Rwanda migrant plan several times in private, according to reports in the Times. He was said to be more than disappointed at the policy. The comments were reported after a High Court ruling paved the way for the first flight to the East African country to go ahead. On Tuesday, that is coming Tuesday, 2 days from now, an appeal against the ruling has been launched. Home Secretary Priti Patel announced the plan in April, in which migrants arriving illegally in the UK will be sent to Rwanda, where they can apply for asylum. She hopes this will act as a deterrent to people dangerously crossing the channel in small dinghies from northern France. More than 10,000 have arrived so far this year. Stuart Anderson, Conservative MP for Wolverhampton Southwest, said, I've got huge respect for the royal family, but they should remain politically neutral. If they pick sides, whatever side of a political debate, they will start to put people against them. Now, that is not the case. That is not going to happen. Why? Because most people in this country are absolutely brainwashed supporters of the royal family. Now, whether Charles, when he becomes heir to the throne, becomes the actual king, whether he would cause any loss of that support is yet to be seen, because most people are so brainwashed into supporting the royal family that that kind of remark is unlikely to cause any loss in support. Now, the fact that this is the opinion of the Express is not to be confused with the opinion of the majority of the people in the country, because most people in the country are not really aware of the actual facts of the Rwanda adventure by Priti Patel, who is the Home Secretary, that is Minister for the Department of the Interior. So let's move on to the Observer newspaper today. The Observer newspaper is owned by the Guardian Group, and it says that families are being broken by unregulated court experts. Now, this is a look at the judiciary. Remember, we are looking at the judiciary, the House of Parliament, and this is the list of the things that we are The world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street has been replaced by world exclusive diagnosis of the world of political states, parliaments, jurisprudence, constitutions in the context of universal need for justice, the emergency duty to stop violating the planet and to move to ending poverty at root. Now, we said jurisprudence, not judiciary, but we can call this judiciary. And the fact that this headline in the Observer front page, the second leading article in the Observer of the 12th of June, it says mothers are having their children taken away by court-appointed psychological experts who are unregulated and do not have the necessary qualifications. The Association of Clinical Psychologists, UK, has warned. Now, there are two problems with that piece. First of all, it doesn't actually say that the fault lies with the bureaucracy and the bureaucratic, whether the courts are operated in this country. And secondly, it credits the Association of Clinical Psychologists, UK, as a source of this concern. Now, that may be very much linked with the loss of business by the members of the Association of Clinical Psychologists who are being sidestepped and ignored by the courts appointing psychological experts, regardless of their being regulated or not. And the other aspect of this issue, this particular paragraph, leading paragraph in the Observer, is that it doesn't say anything that the court system in this country is corrupt, that the court system is illegal. It may sound contradictory, but it is illegal because the majority of the international treaties that I referred to earlier are completely disregarded by the UK domestic courts, which is what this court is, the family court, the secret court, whatever. And there is no mention of the international treaties in the rest of the article, which is bylined to two writers. One is Hannah Summers and the other is Beatrice Campbell. Now, Beatrice Campbell is the one who is older than Hannah Summers. And politically, I know her. I've known her politically, not personally. I have known her. I've had kind of personal contacts, but those contacts have been in the context of the particular campaigns. And I have to say this about Beatrice Campbell. She is no flag carrier for liberty and tolerance and feminism and whatever, despite the fact that her wiki entry says that she has been mainly a feminist and that she has been for a long time, or was for a long time, a member of the Communist Party of Britain. She's currently a member of the Green Party. She's in her 70s. And I knew her, and I knew her when I was trying to campaign by writing in the Time Out magazine, City Limits, which was followed by the departure of a number of Time Out journalists because of conflict with Tony Elliott, who was the founder of Time Out. Now, I found the reaction of Beatrice Campbell typical of a racist with contempt. She didn't react to me as she would have been expected to do if she were a genuine feminist or genuine opponent of racism. My experience with Fleet Street, in Fleet Street, if you like, as a contract person, I never became a staff journalist in any of the Fleet Street papers. I had no ambition, no aim whatsoever. But from time to time, I have written in various Fleet Street papers and appeared in the Fleet Street context. And I found that Beatrice Campbell was ignorant of the international implications of the UK as a member of the United Nations. And that applies not just to Beatrice Campbell, but to every single one of the so-called left-wing journalists that I can mention. And I mean, many of the things that are currently operating like Spike, the far right kind of platform that has been created by refugees, political refugees from various left parties, and become the right wing's left wing platform. That, if that makes sense, it is that role that they play, the Spike, that I'm calling them that. Because of that, I'm saying that although they disguise themselves as critical thinkers, they're actually right wing. Not only are they right wing, but they're extremely racist, and they're extremely intolerant of Muslims and Islam. I'm not presenting this as an Islamic platform. I'm talking about the evidence, empirical evidence, factual evidence. If I found them critical and hostile to other faiths, I would be pointing that out with equal vigor and consistency. Now, this article, Families Broken by Unregulated Court Experts, doesn't mention any of the international treaties. What it mentions is that Association of Clinical Psychologists and other outlets like the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service, which is being given a positive, mentioned by the Hannah Summerson, Beatrice Campbell bylined piece, which says that the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service describe it as the unjustified resistance or hostility from a child towards one person as a result of psychological manipulation by the other. That is the description they are publishing about parental alienation. That is the actual core issue about which this family court being using court-appointed psychologists, because these psychological experts are using the appearance of parental alienation as the reason for separating children from their families. And this article says most of the parents are women, mothers, not fathers. So again, going to the definition of parental alienation they've used by sourcing it with the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service, which describes parental alienation as, quote, unjustified resistance or hostility from a child towards one parent as a result of psychological manipulation by the other parent. Again, this is not acknowledging the source of the international treaties recognizing children's rights, recognizing the right of persons, parents of any gender, to universally verifiable justice by the court system. So, what I'm saying is that despite the fact that Beatrice Campbell is described as a feminist and listed as an author of about 10 or 12, quote, books, she is actually a prisoner of the outlook in which most of the British journalists operate from. So they've got various displays, tokens of being liberal and free thinking and campaigning, but they are not really breaking the mold. And the reason why they are not breaking the mold is because they are not anti-racist. they're not for justice, and they're not educated, enlightened by any of the international treaties. And none of the courts in this country, high courts, let's say high courts are priorities, given priority because of the reference, because their rulings are published rather than the rulings or decisions of most of the courts, like the county courts or the magistrates' courts. So the jurisprudence that we have mentioned at the beginning of this program, that is the record of decisions and the thinking, the analysis of the actual purpose of the rulings, that can be identified as being representative of a particular contemporary judicial view about a particular subject or some particular problem. They are devoid. The High Court, Queen's Bench Division is the one that has the largest number of courts, high courts, and the other courts, Family Division, the Administrative Court, including the Supreme Court in the UK, which is a false description of Supreme Court, because this is a recent name. It used to be part of the UK Houses of Parliament, the upper house, the so-called Houses of Peers, where the section was allowed to be used as the de facto apex court and the senior court in this country. None of the jurisprudence attributable to or ascribed to the House of Lords in its judicial capacity, or the Supreme Court in its capacity since it became established as the Supreme Court, none of the jurisprudence recognizes the impact, the implication, let alone the priority or the superiority that is warranted by the international treaties which are ratified by the United Kingdom. Not all the international treaties are ratified by the UK, but the majority are. When I asked the particular information part of the House of Commons about the UK's compliance with the international treaties, I was told that there were problems in them giving the information. Think about that. Just think about that. We are not going to have to discuss this at length, but the point is that the statement made by Imran Khan to Piers Morgan in the last few days, I think, that the standard of British Parliament is very high, which is why Imran Khan said to Piers Morgan, democracy works, or democratic accountability works in the case of Britain better than Imran Khan implied in the case of Pakistan. Now, Imran Khan could not be more wrong on that. Now, that should not be confused with the fact that for the last few weeks Khoodeelaar campaign has been noting most of the appearances by Imran Khan as a campaigner on the road against the current government that has replaced his government that was ousted. So Imran Khan could not be more wrong. Imran Khan is not the only one of the diversity token evident through the British media who has got completely ignorant, overestimated, over-exaggerated view about the British Parliament and its standard. There is a piece in the Observer, same Observer today, the Observer magazine, featuring Fluella Benjamin. Now, Fluella Benjamin is a woman of African background, but she is very much portrayed as the acceptable face of diversity tokenism in this country. And she looks in the picture that they have published with the feature. She looks very pleased with herself, and her contents are absolutely consistent with that kind of outlook that she is very pleased with herself, her achievements, etc. Now, she, like Imran Khan, has got a very wrong idea about the standards of British Parliament, or because she is a member of the House of Peers. But in the piece, in the Observer, she is not dwelling at length in any way on the constitutional absurdity of the House of Peers. But the fact is that she is very pleased with herself being a member of the House of Peers. And I'm sure that if Imran Khan were in our position, he would be doing the same. So despite the fact that compared to the others in Pakistan in the current context, I have noted Imran Khan's various analytical points and claims about democracy being imperiled by the interference of the foreign forces. I cannot allow that to be confused with a wholly kind of complete endorsement of Imran Khan politically. Because in the last 3 years, I mean, since we began broadcasting on this platform during 2020, I have made detailed comments about Imran Khan as to what he should be doing while he was in post. Of course, I received no response, but I was not making the comments expecting any response from Imran Khan or indeed from anybody else on his behalf or anybody else hostile to him. The points I made were universal. That is to say, I made the points in the belief that whatever I said to him, regardless of whether he followed my advice or not, would survive him. And that is the case. I'm not going to list the things that I said about him in post in Pakistan as the Prime Minister. But I told him one thing that I did tell him repeatedly, nothing to do with my affiliation or any affiliation with any political party, grouping, whatever. It's my observation. I said to him that in 1971, the then Pakistan military committed crimes against innocent people in East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. And I said to him that one of the most urgent things that needs to be done, and I said that again, is for the Pakistan regime, whatever the composition of the Pakistan government, to acknowledge fully and wholly the crimes that were committed against innocent people by the Pakistan military in the name of, quote, Pakistan. And I said to Imran Khan that he could begin the process by starting. I didn't say that he should do it in one go only. I said he should start. And he didn't start. He hasn't started. And he cannot say now that he's out of the political office that anything about 1971, because while he was in power, he didn't do anything about 1971 and the crimes committed by the Pakistan military against the innocent people in then East Pakistan, and there is no counting, because no one can actually count the number of people that were victimized, attacked, starved, and sexually assaulted, raped, and murdered and massacred in the name of keeping Pakistan together. That is the Pakistan today and the East Pakistan as it then was. There is no counting. There cannot be an accurate or near accurate number of people who were innocent people. Of course, all of them were innocent, and they were murdered and massacred and raped and violated. If Imran Khan had made one simple statement, He didn't have to speak, or he didn't have to say anything very long. He just should have said that he was aware of what had happened. He wasn't there at the time. Obviously, he was not in power or whatever. But he was aware, he became aware, and when he became prime minister, he had access to too many information that is still not made public about what happened in 1971. So he should have said that I acknowledge this. This happened in the name of Pakistan. And before I go into the details, in due course, he could have said, I am absolutely and totally appalled. And I apologize to all the victims and all their supporters and all their families and all the survivors. And then he could go on and he could do it by installment. Because, of course, as the prime minister, he had other ministers and other people in the coalition or whatever he had that he had to kind of carry with him. But he didn't do that. And it would have not cost him or his regime or his government anything to say that. So I say this as an example of how political post holders squander opportunities that are priceless. They could not buy this. The benefit that Imran Khan could buy would have been without any money, without any loss of any amount of resource. It would have enhanced his position, as Angela Merkel did with the question of the people of mainly Turkish origin, and it would have enhanced him internationally, absolutely internationally. Because in my debate with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the late 1960s, immediately after he was kicked out of the government by then military dictator Ayub Khan, I confronted Bhutto at the event held at the Institute of Engineers in Dhaka. I confronted without any planning, and I confronted him as the only person that confronted Bhutto at that gathering. And I asked him 9 questions. And I found that Bhutto was ill-educated, ill-informed, and ignorant about the history of then Pakistan or the subcontinent. Because my questions to him were about history, about the legacies, about the backgrounds to what was Pakistan, the 1960s, few years before 1971. And yet, the image of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto that was portrayed in Karachi, because he came from Sindh, and the Karachi-based English language papers, which I could see while I was in Dhaka, were absolutely kind of overhyping him, or the headings were overhyping him as the most radical, etc., political personality in Pakistan at the time, in contrast to the military dictator Ayub Khan at the time. So when Bhutto arrived in Dhaka, shortly after being kicked out of the kind of military government by Ayub Khan, who fronted the military government, controlled the military government, Bhutto arrived in Dhaka with the clear plan that he would benefit from that image that he had been given by the media, English language media in Karachi and others, and that he would, in one sweep, he would convince the most talented young people, politically motivated, conscious people in East Pakistan, capital Dhaka, to join his movement, because he was yet to launch the People's Party, but that is the movement that he was promising, and he was kind of anticipating, if you like. So when he gave his speech, which wasn't very long, his speech was not about what he would deliver for the country democratically, what he would do for justice, what he would do against poverty or hunger, because he was dressed in a way that did not have anything common with the people, ordinary people of East Pakistan or the ordinary people of West Pakistan. He was a kind of alien kind of image. But regardless of that, because most of the people in the gathering in the Institute of Engineers were not very different. I mean, they were mainly from the backgrounds, whatever the proportion, well-off backgrounds in the Engineers Institute. And almost all of them, I would suspect, able to understand his speech because he spoke in English. So when he spoke and he finished his speech, I was there just as one of the people that attended that. I had no preparation. I had not done any reading, looking up, or whatever about him or anything else. I took his words and I asked him, which is my style. I asked him, can you elaborate on that? Substantiate that? Now, remember, that was the first question that I put to him. And I had no idea how many other questions would follow, or how many more questions I would have to ask him. And it went from 1, 2, 3, up to 9 questions. And with each question that followed, Bhutto's facial expression became worse than it was with the previous question, because he was struggling to find confident answers to my questions. And the reason he was doing that was because I was not accepting his latest attempt at answering my question. And a point came after the 9th question when Bhutto, as people can imagine, his face became red. And he wiped either sweat or tears from his eyes with his whatever it was, handkerchief or whatever. And he literally stormed out of the stage, left the Institute of Engineers, and he rushed to the Intercontinental Hotel, which was not far from the Institute of Engineers. And not long after that, he flew back to West Pakistan. Think about that. That was 3 years or so before 1971, 3 or 4 years before 71. And Bhutto did not recruit anyone from East Pakistan. And it was indirectly as a result of my dissection of Bhutto in front of these people who would have been his potential prospective supporters and fans. Now imagine the scenario when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, numerically the second most popular politician at the time in East and West Pakistan, he was the second most because of Sheikh Mujib, I'm saying, was the first one, the most popular one at the time, regardless of the fact that I did not agree with Mujib's program. What is the program? The program was that it was not a program for independence at all. It was a program for subordination to India. Think about that, which is what is happening in the main political agitation in Bangladesh today is about that subordination to India. Nothing to do with the political party. Most certainly not about independence. And there was no program of independence by the Awami League. Now, when I said to Bhutto that he failed to answer my questions, if he had said anything about the future of the country, he would have made some progress about the political movement that he was planning to launch, which he later launched, but not in the way that he thought. And he could have become the second most popular political party leader in East Pakistan as well. Think about that. That would have meant that instead of the Awami League as led by Shah Mujib becoming the numerically the biggest political party in East Pakistan, it would have been followed by a rival party, a movement led by Zulfikar Bhutto. But Bhutto had contempt for the country, and Bhutto didn't have any respect for the people of either wing, as events later proved. So all of those things I've said effectively in my previous broadcasts, and I have said to Imran Khan that he should make up for the deficiencies and the defects and the failures of Bhutto. Imran Khan failed to do that. His spats with Benazir Bhutto's husband are completely meaningless. Well, meaningless because Asif Zardari is not a significant political kind of person or personality, never has been, never will be. And Zardari is not addressing the imperatives, the democratic imperatives that are absent from the political status quo today. Zardari can never do that, nor can his son, Benazir's son. And there is the dilemma. And I think that even if there is a change, I cannot predict exact scenario because I'm not there. If there is a change of government, a change of regime, and if Imran Khan's position changes in terms of being a member of a government again, I'm not saying he will be, or I'm not saying he will not be. It is not whether he becomes a member of the government or not. It is what his outlook is, and he has not spelled out the international comprehensive outlook for the country, either in relation to China or in relation to the United States or in relation to the West. And that is where these people, whether they are in Pakistan or in Britain, people like Floella Benjamin and Imran Khan, remain in a lower standard than they should actually endeavor to be. They should not be supplicating to the highest standard of the British Parliament, which is a disgraceful certification in favor of the crooked British House of Commons and British House of Peers. Anyone who knows what has been happening in this country parliamentarily, in terms of parliamentary kind of records, would know that there is no standard in the UK House of Commons at all. No standard whatsoever. Because if there were a standard that could be actually mentioned, then there would not be the wrongdoings, the injustices, the various open violations of the universal principles of justice. The points I make about Bangladesh and the independence is that Bangladesh remains one of the most poorest countries in the world, and it shouldn't be. And the reason why it remains as poor as it is, despite the fact that comparatively small numbers of people are not in poverty because they are robbers and looters, the majority of the people is what I'm talking about, is because there is no real political opposition from any part of the spectrum. Call them the Bangladesh National Party or Nationalist Party, the Bangladesh BNP, or the so-called Islamic Party or parties. These parties lack a comprehensive international perspective about Bangladesh itself, about the alternative to the current regime. Because if the current regime were replaced, there wouldn't be a real improvement for the ordinary people. Not because there shouldn't be, nor because there aren't people who are promising that there would be improvement in the plight of the people in the country by removing the current regime. I'm not saying they're not promising that, they are promising that. But they are not capable of delivering an improved, significantly improved standard. And that has been the problem with East Pakistan, because the political movement that the late Maulana Bashani kind of represented was numerically very small, and the support for his cause or his approach was very small. And there was nothing in any of the parties that were operating at the time during most of the 1950s and 1960s. There was nothing that prepared the country for a regime post-independence, so-called. Let's say post-separation. There was no discussion, there was no admission about the serious problems that would arise because of inherent corruption in all the parties, all the factions of the parties. I never belonged to any of the parties precisely because every single party was intellectually deficient and morally corrupt, and it remains the case. So I'm not speaking as an agent of anybody, I'm speaking for myself. And I speak for myself because I care about what happens to the plight to the people who are denied justice, but they shouldn't have been denied justice. So the context of 1971 is really a secondary context. The context is 1947, and it continues from 1947 to now. What was promised would be delivered after the British left. Imran Khan is the only one in Pakistan who has referred to 1947 in the recent past, but he didn't do that while he was in post, in power. And the same case is in Bangladesh, no real reference to 1947. What there is too much incestuous, overhyped, spiteful references to each other, like the political parties hate one another so much that they lose the plot and they don't discuss the concept of freedom, the concept of independence. It is gang. One member, one supporter of one of the parties in Bangladesh told me some years ago, he said, "Bhai sahab, apne ita kita matoin? Apne kita khoin যে বাংলাদেশে কোনো নৈতিকতা নাই, তে নৈতিকতা থাকতো আপনি হইন কিতা? বাংলাদেশ হইল গিয়া গ্যাংস্টারর দেশ, আপনি কিতা মাতইন? আপনি ভাইবানি কোনো হানো গিয়া বাংলাদেশে কোনো স্ট্যান্ড অনযথায় বাংলাদেশি পলিটিক্স করেন আগুন গ্যাংস্টার." So what he said to me was that the political parties in Bangladesh are parties intended or organized, orchestrated for gangsters, not for ethics, for ethical delivery, democracy, accountability. And those in the UK or abroad who fancy themselves as supporters or members of one party or another in Bangladesh are equally corrupt and engaged in gangster mentality. So who is going to listen to you? And he's absolutely right. But my purpose is not to be listened to. My purpose is to put on the record what I am thinking at the time. And that is the most important thing that can happen. This is the deliberation, because no platform exists, to my knowledge, that is dealing with the evidence that I'm doing, the way that I'm doing. And so therefore, that is the biggest contribution that I could make to say what is happening today. And what I've said about Imran Khan is what nobody else would be saying. Because his opponents, the corrupt families that Imran Khan has correctly condemned for being as corrupt as they have been and they are, their criticism is against him, designed to pander to and please the foreign kind of influencers like China, like Russia, like the USA. So there's a mentality of subordination, mentality of servitude, not independent mentality. Now, I say that when the poet who wrote in Bengali or Bangla, Nazrul Islam, when he wrote many of his rebel poetry, Bolobir Unnatam Moshir, how could he say that? In a population that has absolutely no moral understanding or moral interest whatsoever. Today I'm saying in 2002. Can you imagine anyone saying, Bolobir Unnatam Moshir, Shir Nehari Amari, Notashir Oi Shikor Himadrir? Who could say that? The Mount Everest, he's saying, is lower than him. Think about that. So when he wrote that, or similar, he was not representing any of these people. Of course, he was representing all of them, but he was not representing any of them. Because although he was representing himself, he was motivated by carrying the movement, creating the movement for the liberation of the people, for the justice to be delivered to these people. He was not being followed by them. He expected them to follow him. He was entitled to expect them to follow him, but he was not being followed by them. Like even Tagore, who was, because of Tagore being given the Nobel Prize in 1913, Tagore is rated in the West as the definitive poet and writer from the subcontinent, from Bengal. When Tagore was given the Nobel Prize, and he became an instant sensation not because of his qualities. Think about that. He became an instant sensation in Bengal and the rest of the country, subcontinent, because the West had recognized him. That is the depth of the brainwashing on the part of the opinion formers, the influencers. They said that the West has recognized Tagore. Therefore, he must be great. He was great, of course, but their criteria was that the West had recognized. Now, that is not independence, is it? Think about that. And yet, Tagore wrote some of the most original essays, some of the most original analysis of the world and of humanity that can be found in any literature, any language. Like I always say, and I'll always think, and I'm extremely aware of what he wrote about library. মহাসমুদ্রের শতবৎসরের কল্লোল কেহ যদি এমন করিয়া বাঁধিয়া রাখিতে পারিত. That is the beginning. I can't remember the rest of it, but that is the piece I'm referring to. মহাসমুদ্রের শতবৎসরের কল্লোল কেহ যদি এমন করিয়া বাঁধিয়া রাখিতে পারিত. So Tagore wrote that about library, saying that Mahasamudra, that is not ordinary ocean, the big ocean, the ripples of a big ocean over 100 years. Just pause and think. The ripples of the big ocean, the big sea, the ripples seen, witnessed over 100 years of big sea. If it were possible to put all those ripples in a pack, just think about that, then that could approach what a library is in comparison. Mahasamudrer Shatavatsarer Kallur. Now, I have not read anything like that in any other language or heard anything like that from anyone. And I'm totally intellectually, absolutely in full agreement to Tagore, and I'm grateful for him explaining the magnitude of a library in the way that he so beautifully did. Such a source of intellect, such a source of depth of understanding, admitted during his last years that he had to beg, he had to come to Europe begging for money. Now, those people who are saying that he is the greatest poet and all the rest of it, I mean, his contemporaries who said that, they were not in the slightest bothering to help Tagore when he needed the help. Think about that. He is the one writer, thinker, philosopher who had already created a legacy that any number, thousands of writers, philosophers could not begin to match. And it was him that admitted, of course it must have been a very painful admission, but he did have to admit, whatever the circumstances were, that he was traveling Europe not for inspiration or to spread his message, whatever. He was traveling Europe essentially in order to raise funds. So when Tagore wrote that anthem, that is the Indian national anthem, I mean, despite the controversy about the origin of his intention, saying that he wrote it to please the British imperial monarch, put that all aside and look at the beginning of his anthem. He is delivering the words and the imagery in the most natural way, most natural and lucid way. He's describing the subcontinent, his country, well, let's say India. Punjab, Sindh. I mean, these words put in the most simplest way the names of these regions, and they become melodious and meaningful. And that kind of depth of understanding and that kind of identification with the land of your birth is very rare in expression. So the only other person that in a different way matched Tagore is, of course, the Bidrohi, in a completely different way, because Tagore represented one kind of set of dimensions that Tagore wasn't calling for physical activities in the way that Nazrul did. Kandari Hushiyar and other poems that he wrote in the custody, while in custody in the British controlled prisons. These are, I mean, more powerful than any music can ever do, ever convey. So these are the criteria, these are the standards, these are the levels, these are the heights that independence and freedom and liberation and tolerance and society depend on and encompass and deliver and carry and contain. These are the ideas that inspired the other one. These are the two, and the other one is Iqbal, of course. Iqbal, like Tagore and like Nazrul Islam, is the subject of all kinds of contradictory claims. Many people claim them for their own purposes. And Iqbal wrote, of course, his Tarana-e-Millat. Tarana-e-Milli, it's two versions are going. One is the one that is based on the identity as Hindustan, and the other is identity as a Muslim. That is part of the kind of contradiction that other people have created. Essentially, Iqbal's message was universal. It wasn't parochial, and it was the opposite of parochial. Same case with Nazrul, same case in a different way with Tagore, because Tagore was less engaged in the way that the poetry and the writing and the thoughts of Nazrul are. Durgam Giri, Kantar Muru. Dustor Paraban. I'm a Sylheti born child. None of these Bengali words, mainly Sanskrit based, was anywhere near my upbringing. So I had to kind of contextually understand many of the phrases and words that Nazrul wrote. Even Durgam Giri is not a Siloti expression. Kantar Muru most certainly is not. Durgam Giri, Kantar Muru, Dustor Parabar. All of these are not Siloti expressions. But I had to, because there was no dictionary at the time that I was first reading them. Not a long time, and I have not really consulted any dictionary. Durgam Giri, Kantar Maru, Dustor Parabar. Longite hobe, Ratri Nishite, Jatri. This is followed by, of course, Farooq Ahmad, but Farooq Ahmad has been, his image has been affected by hostility to what his critics and the propagandists against him think was his inspiration. They think he was a Muslim. He was guilty of being a Muslim. Of course, his being a Muslim was not only not a guilty thing, not only something that he should be in any way accused of, but they thought that he could be condemned by his being Muslim, and he's following the various imageries and narratives that can be located in the Islamic or Muslim liturgy, in the Muslim literature. But Farooq is one of the most powerful spiritual, philosophical, ethical writers. Panjari. Raat pohabar kotoderi Panjari. Now that is a short poem, but it sums up, it contains probably the longest statement about the dilemma faced by the fighters for freedom, seekers of refuge, as against the status quo anywhere. And I think that these are the components, these are the ingredients. Not all of them, of course, these are I've only mentioned four, that make the idea of freedom and liberation. So in this country, in the UK, the discussion, this person who spoke to me said, "Apne kitna toin? Gundar party, ar apne koi nita kon, apne koi noitikota, apne koi hasamatito." Now, who is going to bridge that gap? Who is going to remove the Gunda mentality? And who is going to bring about education? Because in the curriculum, in the syllabus that is imposed in the UK on children, nothing like that exists. They worship Shakespeare. They don't recognize any of the people from the subcontinent, let alone from Africa or other countries. So education is a prisoner again. And none of the inspiration that inspired these people, these poets, writers, thinkers, is recognized or reflected in the frames of references that are used and cited when describing the various confrontations in this country within the political system, so called. If you look at as I was saying before, if you look at the reasoning of the judiciary, the English judiciary, let's call it English judiciary because that's what it is, doesn't recognize the world. It's a little England mentality. And despite the fact that David Neuberger, whom I have discussed before, David Neuberger was the appointee, the first appointee in the Supreme Court presidency, the chair of the Supreme Court. Neuberger was the chair, the president of the Supreme Court. Despite the background, his German background, but Neuberger, is it German or Polish? One of those. We can check that one. I'm not going to check this now, but it can be checked. But Neuberger has exposed himself as open to being bought. And when the Brexiteers kind of got going and they needed some kind of platform because the Brexit jargon and the Brexit agenda and the Brexit manipulations were devoid of substance, of intellect, of any standard whatsoever. Most certainly no standards that Imran Khan was kind of acknowledging in his strange conversation with Piers Morgan. David Neuberger was hired by David Lidington. Lidington was notoriously referred to as Theresa May's deputy prime minister. But Lidington was an accomplished, what the privatized original founders would call Arsli Khan. Lidington was appointed the kind of Secretary of State in the judicial bureaucracy department. And Lidington thought that it would be a coup he could stage to impress his boss, Theresa May, then Prime Minister. If he could recruit David Neuberger to come across even modestly singing the praise of Brexit. So Neuberger sang the praise of Brexit. In a piece reported by Martin Bentham, the so-called Home Affairs editor of the London Evening Standard, in July 2017, the year after the Brexit court decision, Neuberger was reported as saying that London would become the center for the world's litigants. Now, litigation, by definition, is a bad thing. It's not really something in the context of England that really produces justice. That's the point. Whatever side you are in the litigation, it costs a lot of time, creates a lot of stress, and wastes a lot of time, and it is not, most of the times, it is not what justice demands. But Neuberger was not interested in justice. Neuberger and Lidington were interested in the economic robbery that London being used as a center of all litigation facilitated or would facilitate. I say about Neuberger what I've just said because as the president of the Supreme Court, I mean, objectively, he should have been expected to tell the truth. He should have been expected to be intellectually inspired and motivated by morality and the demands for justice. But he wasn't. That piece by Martin Bentham in July 2017 was written after Neuberger attended a gathering of Australian lawyers. Can you imagine? I mean, what is Australia doing in Brexit? But that was the stunt. The idea was that the line that the Brexiteering promoters have followed is that there will be a wholly new world created as a result of Brexit, and previously undreamt of goodies would follow. And the goodies would follow mainly from the empire. The empire suppressed by the anti-Brexiteers, that is their line. So that is why Johnson was in a rush last year to go and see Narendra Modi in India, because despite the fact that 1947 happened, the imperialists in Britain still harbor the fantasy that India is part of the British Empire in a way that it should not be treated. But that is what Johnson was capitalizing on. He wanted to go to meet Modi, not because of Modi's BJP or whatever, but he wanted to go there and create a stunt that could be decorated as an achievement in economic terms, linked only and exclusively to Brexit. It has never happened, despite the fact that Johnson later has gone to India and come to an agreement with the Indian regime that thousands and thousands and thousands of people from India would be treated with comparative leniency, and their immigration access to the UK would be much easier than the immigration hurdles put in the way of other people. And that is based on the premise that Indians that would be treated like that would bring millions and millions of Indian rupees, which is the same reason why so many of the Muslim dictators in the Middle East are given the red carpet and given the treatment by Britain. Successive British prime ministers and regimes have treated the authoritarian, anti-democratic, oppressive Muslim so-called leaders in the Middle East. So it's not about religion, it's about the amount of money that these dictators would bring to the UK, to British market or whatever. Margaret Thatcher did the same. Margaret Thatcher, who condemned Nelson Mandela as a terrorist, was worshipping terrorists terrorizing their own people in the Middle East in return for billions and billions of worth contracts. So none of these issues is being discussed in the Fleet Street Papers, and none of these issues has been raised ever really in the UK House of Commons The House of Commons, whose high standards Imran Khan praised to pierce more on. So that is another significant point that has to be made. I mean, we reject Imran Khan's comments praising the British standards, especially as he was making the appearance not long after the Sugre report, not long after the many people, the Conservatives, voted to get rid of Boris Johnson. Based on Boris Johnson's lies and lying. Of course, the majority of the Conservatives in the House of Commons still voted for Johnson, but that showed lack of standards, not operational standards. And there is no evidence, despite the pretensions of the Guardian and the Observer, there is no evidence that morality and ethics have been at the center of the considerations against Johnson. Because what there has been is a short-term opportunism to either keep him or to get him out of the post. So if, for example, the government changes and it's replaced by Starmer at the front or somebody else, there is no chance that the standards of the parliament would be any different, most certainly not any higher than it is now, and it is very low. And the press, the media, will not be delivering justice to the readers or the public by scrutinizing the absence of standards and reporting the absence of standards. We shall be talking more about all of this in due course. This is what time is it now? It's 1 hour, 47 minutes, plus few seconds since we have been live on this program on Sunday, the 12th of June, 2022. And we shall be continuing in the next editions. This is called Justice for Baby Angel Geronimo. That actually is the theme, the running theme, the narrative of this program, because of the injustice that has been done to the most innocent baby angel Geronimo by the depraved cabal fronted by Boris Johnson. Baby angel Geronimo is a New Zealand-born alpaca, which is a member of the camel family. And he is the most beloved, most innocent baby angel Geronimo ever, anywhere. And he is the subject of 4 years long vilification, lying, attacks against him by the depraved UK central government department called DEFRA, currently fronted by George Injustice Eustace. And DEFRA's vilification of the most innocent baby angel Geronimo has been endorsed, promoted, and justified by Boris Johnson, as well as by Keir Starmer, as well as by weasel West Streeting. Weasel is the word used about West Streeting that we noticed today on the Navara media, which is a an outfit that is on the quote left in British politics. We don't agree with Navara media on most things, especially we don't agree with them giving a platform to Luther Rahman to make the false claims that Luther Rahman made. But we note a lot of what they were broadcast and what they publish. And we noted the fact that they called West Streeting, Weasel West Streeting. In the context of this speculation, that Streeting might be one of the wannabes to become successor to Keir Starmer as so-called leader of the Labour Party in the parliament. So, West Streeting, Keir Starmer, Dominic Lawson, Ian Pissoff, the editor of Private Lie, these are among the people that have actually supported the depraved DEFRA and endorsed the DEFRA's attacks on the most innocent baby angel Geronimo. And we said in the last edition that we refer to baby angel Geronimo being attacked by 3 High Court judges, serial. They didn't do it in one sitting. They had 3 different cases. And in all 3 of the cases, these 3 judges, sitting separately, repeated, regurgitated the same set of words and phrases and lies against the most innocent baby angel Geronimo. Now, Geronimo is the symbol of the witness, the most innocent witness to the injustice that is the British state and state agencies. And all the wrongs, all the injustices, all the lies, all the corruption that can be found in the behavior of the British state and its agencies, and incumbents like Johnson and Eustace injustice in the various state positions, they can be found, absolutely found, listed on the lies and the fabrications and the criminality that they confected to demonize baby angel Geronimo. That is why it's so important. And none of the newspapers, including The Guardian, The Observer, has cottoned on to that fact. And that is one of the reasons why we are no longer focusing on just the contents of the role of the newspapers. We are going beyond that. The newspapers are not the centers of the attention that they think there should be. They are only vehicles of the lies and fabrications and contamination and the untruths. And we also talked about the defamation actions being was brought against Colleen Rooney, the wife of a footballer, Wayne Rooney's wife, Colleen Rooney, by the wife of another footballer, Rebecca Vardy. And the way that the Daily Mail group and the Murdoch scum covered the so-called proceedings in the High Court suggested that Rebecca Vardy was not only wrong to bring that action against Colleen Rooney, but that by daring to bring a defamation action against Colleen Rooney, Rebecca Vardy became legitimately a criminal. That's the way that they have actually reported this. So it would be very interesting to see what the judge makes of Rebecca Vardy's rights to protect her reputation and to get vindication. If the judge delivers, as the Sun and the Daily Mirror, well, the Daily Mail, not the Mirror so much, but essentially they are in the same league in terms of hostility to Rebecca Vardy. If the judge delivers in the way that these outlets have been expecting and anticipating and kind of preparing their readers and audiences to expect, then it would confirm once again the depth of the corruption and criminality of the English judiciary. Because in the case that Johnny Depp had brought in the English High Court against the actress Amber Heard, his former wife, they actually rejected Johnny Depp's defamation application. Of course, it's the same Johnny Depp who has been vindicated, however small the amount of money that has been awarded him by the court in Virginia, USA. It's the same Johnny Depp, and very interesting contrast. And we shall be looking forward to the opportunity to examine what the verdict in the Vardy versus Rooney defamation action is. There is also another defamation action that is reported in the Observer today that is due to be published. The ruling on that one is due to be published. And that is the defamation action that Aaron Banks, one of the mysterious funders of the Brexit campaign, Vote Leave campaign, brought against Carol Cordwaller, a freelance journalist writing in both the Observer and the Guardian, and also appearing on other platforms. That would be interesting to see what the rationale is, because the way that the Observer has covered it today suggests, and I'm saying only suggests, that they may feel that the judgment is going to be in favor of Aaron Banks, because the way they're covering it shows that they're concerned that freedom of journalists is being exposed to serious risk. And that is the issue. So we shall be looking at that, and we shall be talking about that when it is published and when we can make comments. One local issue, which is the Tower Hamlets Council, which we are particularly interested in updating on, which is the imposition of the post of corrupt mayor on the Tower Hamlets Council. Now, Tower Hamlets is a council based in the east end of London, east side of London. And further to the east of Tower Hamlets is the London Borough of Newham. And to the north of Tower Hamlets, northeast of Tower Hamlets, and the northwest of Newham is the London Borough of Hackney. These are very near to one another, and all three of those have been lumbered with the corrupt post of executive mayor. Newham was the first one to be so lumbered about 20 years ago, with Robin Wales being first elected mayor in Newham. And Wales was there for 16 years, I think. And the other borough in London to be lumbered with the mayor is Lewisham. So there were 4 London boroughs lumbered with the anti-democratic, fascistic, corrupting post of mayor. The latest one to be lumbered with the same corrupting post is Croydon, which is southwest side of London. So all of these councils are originally unaccountable, were originally unaccountable anti-democratic regimes even before the corrupting element of executive mayor was imposed. But they've become 10 times worse. Now, our campaign is the only one that is actually talking about this. In this way, we are saying they're corrupt. The likes of the Novara media and the Socialist Workers' Party and spiked the right-wing kind of platform for the left-wing, former left-wingers. They think that the corrupt mayor post in Tower Hamlets has been a socialist event because they said that Luthraman is a socialist. Well, this is Novara media has been saying that more than the other two, but that anyone has said that Luthraman is a socialist is an event so shocking and so irrational, so untruthful and so corrupt that it requires its own edition of the diagnostic broadcast, which we shall be doing as an update because we have been covering this more or less for the longest period, except with the last 6 calendar months when we didn't broadcast because of issues and factors that were beyond our control. But we have actually been updating on the events of Tower Hamlets Council, and we shall be continuing. So this is 1750 GMT, which is 2 hours and 2 minutes and 16 seconds length of the broadcast. So we shall be calling this the last moment of this edition until the next edition.